I would like to introduce one of our guests, Humberto Delgado Rosa. He is the Director for Biodiversity at the European Commission's Directorate General for Environment. We're very excited to hear his insights on past EU efforts to protect biodiversity and obviously the nature restoration law itself. Welcome, Humberto.
Thank you very much, Ricarda. I'm actually very pleased to be with you and with this very interesting audience in a very interesting and hot topic now in European policy making, which is nature restoration. So if I can start with my opening remarks, let me start by saying, well, let's not forget, we are amidst the UN Decade of Restoration. It goes from 2021 to 2030. And we just recently had this big success in Montreal in 2022, where the Convention for Biological Diversity has agreed a new, let's call it, global deal for nature, which does include a quantified target for nature restoration. 30% of all degraded ecosystems should be restored until 2030. So why is this so? Why the UN Decade of Restoration? Why a restoration target now politically binding globally? Well, in a nutshell, because the biosphere is not in such a good shape at all. We have been developing with amazing results for some aspects of our development as humans, but that has come at the cost of degrading, well, the atmosphere, the land, the sea, which is the biosphere, of which we depend, after all, of its services and life support systems. So it's actually, I would say, climate change and biodiversity loss are pretty much two existential issues that are intertwined and that need action. And such action, a big part of it, is restoration, which I actually find a very powerful and good word because it entails a message of hope. We can put back, at least partially, but to a considerable extent, what we have lost when we want to put it back, when we need to put it back. And I say it because recently in these debates, and a couple of times I heard, oh, if only you would not have called it restoration, if we would find another word. Well, I don't think the problem is at all in the word restoration. Now let me focus a bit on the EU. The EU did deliver the most ambitious biodiversity strategy ever. I say it honestly, I haven't seen another with the same level of ambition. It's strategy to 2030, which included a EU nature restoration plan, reducing several pressures in several sectors and quantifying several measures of putting back nature and protecting nature. One of such measures was announcing that we would come with binding targets on restoration. And the EU, I think, is lucky enough to be a bit ahead of others in the sense of addressing this global target, because in June 2022, we have tabled with the European Commission, we have tabled a proposal of a nature restoration law. First point to say about it, this law, this proposal is not for the sake of nature. It is for the sake of people, in the sense that we need nature back to serve us better on several grounds, on several ecosystem services, to begin with for climate. I just remind, it's the International Panel of Climate Change itself that needs climate change, needs nature restoration. So for resilience of our agriculture system, of our forests, of our fishing grounds, of our cities, of our livelihoods, we have tabled this nature restoration law. It does propose, well, first an overall target, which we hope from this law to have 20% of EU land and sea with measures in place in all 20% of all land and sea of the EU with restoration measures in place by 2030. But it also has concrete binding targets for the member states. They are binding for the EU member states, not for private people, for businesses, for farmers. It's for the member states to then decide how they apply those own targets and measures. But to simplify and not take long, let me say there are overall two kinds of targets. The first kind is for those ecosystems that were already protected in EU law. We have an Habitats Directive, for instance, that established several species and habitats that are protected, and for which the duty to restore pre-existed, because from the Habitats Directive, such habitats should be brought into favorable conservation status. Well, but there was no timeline. So for this kind of pre-existing protected habitats, we propose a timeline of X% restoration measures by 2030, X% by 2040, X% by 2050, to put it simple. But for another set of targets, such as, well, recovering the decline of pollinators or for a group of species, on agroecosystems, on forest ecosystems, on urban greening, what we propose is a positive trend on some indicators. And these indicators, yes, of course, they correlate with the recovery of biodiversity, but particularly they correlate with the resilience of these sectors. So it's not at all on where we restore, we don't have sustainable use, or we put aside production, not at all. We restore in order to ensure the productivity of the land. Now, where are we, let's say, in the process? First, of course, within the Commission, we took a lot of work and an inter-service consultation and analysis, assessment, impact assessment, as we call it, towards the coherence of this proposal with the other set of proposals of the Green Deal and beyond. We've tabled our proposal. In the EU system, only the European Commission can table proposals, but it's up to two other bodies to approve or not such proposals. The European Council, let's say the group of member states, and the European Parliament. Now, the European Council, with good work from the Swedish presidency, has reached what we call a general approach. So they reached an agreement with a qualified majority. There were 5 of the 27 member states voting against, 2 abstaining, the others approving, where a series of concerns of the member states were addressed through proposals by the member states, by the Council, to shape differently what we had proposed to this Commission. And that's totally normal in the negotiation process, in the co-decision process, as we call it. So there are concerns on non-deterioration provisions, on the urban targets, how they were shaped, on rewetting, restoring peatland, on marine targets, on renewable energy compatibility with net restoration, on finance, etc. But as I said, in a normal process of starting the co-decision, the Council has reached a general approach. While in the Parliament, things got complicated because a major group has set itself against the proposal, the Conservatives, the European Popular Party, so that in the specialized committees, first the Agriculture Committee rejected the proposal, the Fisheries Committee rejected the proposal by 1 vote, and yesterday, as Aaron said, there was a draw, 44 to 44. And in the procedures of the Parliament, a draw amounts to a rejection anyway. So rejection at committee level. So the proposal will now go to the plenary, foreseen for the 2nd week of July, if I'm not mistaken, where the parliamentarians will have to take their own decisions. Now, of course, I don't speculate about the political motivations and all this scenario around this situation, but I do go into the arguments used against the proposal, because to be honest, I don't think that several of them withstand a minimally informed analysis. So let me say, I've heard things like, with the nature restoration law, food security would be in question. Even global famine could be a cause. Well, it's enough to think about pollinators, and that 75% of the crops in the EU depend on pollination, which is steeply declining in several regions, to understand that when we propose to restore pollinator populations, we are favoring food security. I can just refer you to a report by the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, where the main conclusion is that the biggest ally for food security in the mid to long term is nature restoration. Then I've heard that we aim to put 10% of all land out of production. Well, this is a total misunderstanding of one specific indicator of agroecosystems, which is landscape features. What we say in alignment with the biodiversity strategy. First, is that one indicators of a restoration is to put back in agricultural land landscape features, which are trees and ponds and walls and all kinds of habitats for those species that in the end are needed for agricultural productivity itself. Think again of pollinators or natural pest control. And these landscape features that have disappeared in immense quantities in many areas of Europe, they are essential to maintain in the long term agricultural productivity. And in themselves, some of them can actually be productive. So it's not true that any land is being decommissioned from the proposal. Most extraordinarily, I've seen the argument that the proposal will be against climate change, against climate change policy. It would contradict climate change policy. But again, nature restoration is the best insurance against climate change, both from the angle of mitigation, because many ecosystems are powerful carbon sinks, and actually the regulations we have for land use versus climate change require restoration of these same ecosystems, but also for adaptation, because having, let's say, urban nature or restore margins of rivers with natural vegetation, to give two examples, that protects us against climate change in itself. So nature restoration favors resilience against floods, heat waves, droughts, etc. Or another argument, we would be against renewable energy because of nature restoration. This is disconsidering the many win-wins between the renewable energy infrastructure and nature restoration. If we just think of the artificial reef effect that offshore wind can have, or the effect of reducing other pressures, such as bottom trawling, for instance. But at the same time, it's a misunderstanding because we do have a target to remove obsolete barriers from European rivers, as from the biodiversity strategy. But I say not obsolete barriers, which we have immense quantity, and not at all the relevant hydropower infrastructure that we have and we certainly need. And again, against fisheries, when we know that nature protection and the restoration in marine areas and nurseries actually increase fisheries. They are actually fisheries replenishment measures, or that would be against urban development when we can certainly develop our cities with more green, with many advantages for our citizens. So in order not to take much time, my final reflections. Many look at restoration as meaning putting people aside. That makes no sense. In Europe, we restore with people and for people. Second, many look to restoration as a cost. And of course, there's a cost of restoration, but the benefits far outweigh the costs. So they are actually investments. And the ratio is 1:8 on cost benefit in general terms. So yes, the nature restoration law is ambitious. It is also needed, as science says very clearly, and the voice of scientists that remain vocally supporting the proposal. Let's see now what will happen in the European Parliament and its follow-up. We, of course, expect for a co-decision process to retain its normality. But I do think that overall public opinion will remain fundamental on the analysis and expression of views on how nature restoration should be dealt with in the EU and globally. And maybe I stop here. I hope I haven't spoken for too long.